Hello everyone, my name is Earl Breon, and you are listening to the Burden of Command podcast. I'm a former active duty United States Marine with over 25 years of coaching and mentoring experience across the military, civilian, federal service, and private sectors. I'm a lifelong learning enthusiast when it comes to leadership, and this podcast is just an extension of that pursuit. My goal with each episode will be to bring you great content from leaders across all spectrums of the word leadership. Leadership is a complicated venture. You are dealing with complex people, on complex teams, in complex organizations, in complex situations. You have to know how to interact with each one of these elements in the appropriate way at the appropriate time in order to achieve success. Lead your team well and it's a glorious thing. Fail in any one aspect and it will be disastrous. This, dear listener, is the Burden of Command. All right, listeners, welcome to this episode of the Burden of Command podcast. Today's guest is a very special guest, Colonel Lee Ellis, Air Force, retired. Colonel Ellis is president of Leadership Freedom LLC, which is a leadership and team development consulting and coaching company. Lee Ellis consults with Fortune 500 senior executives in the areas of hiring, team building, human performance, and succession planning. His media appearances include interviews on networks such as CNN, CBS This Morning, C-SPAN, ABC World News, and Fox News Channel. He is an accomplished author, having written two very great books, one, Leading with Honor, Leadership Lessons from the Hanoi Hilton, and Engage with Honor, Building a Culture of Courageous Accountability. If you'd like to learn more about Colonel Ellis and what he's doing, you can find him on the internet at www.leadingwithhonor.com. Colonel Ellis, thank you very much for your service, and thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you, Earl. Good morning. Good to be with you, and hope you're having a great day.
I'm having a fantastic day, and just to get things rolling, I'm going to ask you the question I lead off with all my guests. The term burden of command, what does that mean to you?
Yes, that's a good question because it is so encompassing it can be scary at times, but I think it's the price of leadership is that you have to own it. You have to own it, one, to own all the pieces, the people, and the mission. You got to accomplish the mission, but you also have to take care of the people for lots of reasons. One, it's the right thing to do, and two, they're the ones that are doing the work. And the better that they're working and feeling about their work, the more successful they're going to work, and the better your organization and mission accomplished is going to be. I think the first word is ownership. You've got to see it that you own it, and that means that you have to accomplish the mission, but you should also plan to leave it in a better condition than you found it. In today's changing world, that can be challenging because sometimes just surviving day to day and with the changes that are coming at us so rapidly, it puts us all in a scrambling mode. And we have to be able to get into the scrambling mode to keep up, but we also at the same time have to be executing the day-to-day plan. And then we also probably have to be maintaining some stuff from the past too. So a lot going on there for the leader.
Well, and that's good. And that's the reason why I ask the question the way I do is, like you said, burden of command. It's something that's, it's going to mean a lot to a lot of different people. And I'm glad to hear your definition with your unique experiences. For the listeners who aren't familiar with Colonel Ellis, he was one of the POWs in the Hanoi Hilton during the Vietnam War. And so you've had a very, very intimate first-hand experience with leadership in tough times, right?
Yes, I did. Now, the thing you got to understand is I learned so much by observation and experience of great leaders because I was never the leader. I was the junior ranking guy in the camp, or not a camp, but in the cell block, and pretty much in the camp. Some camps I was the junior guy and the youngest guy. There were maybe one or two guys that within 3 or 4 months of me. There might have been three much younger than me, but otherwise I was the youngest guy in the camp in junior ranking. So what I learned was from others how they led, what they faced. You're talking about the burden of command. They were being tortured. They were being beaten. They were put in isolation much more often than anyone else, and yet they kept on leading and stayed true to their values. They bounced back. They were beaten down, but they bounced back and kept on leading to accomplish the mission of resisting the enemy and returning with honor.
And so you just said those three words there that, people talk a lot about vision statements and goal setting, but return with honor. From everything I've read, that was sort of and when I say I'm talking about everyone that was in the camp. That was sort of their foundational mantra, right? Return with honor.
Yeah. It started out as, and this was really, you could put it our mission, our vision, and our values. But it started out resist, survive, return with honor. And then over the years, the resisting and surviving became so daily that then it just kind of fell into return with honor, because we knew that to return with honor, we had to resist, we had to survive. So it all boiled down our mission, our vision, our values, because we definitely want to go home, but with honor. And so that was crucial for our situation.
Now, one of the things that my business partner and I talk about when we come into an organization is the sense of belonging. The more people feel like they belong, the more successful the organization is. Yeah. And a lot of people look at us like, okay, that's touchy-feely, fluffy type stuff. We want to move on. But that sense of belonging was very much a cornerstone of surviving in the Hilton, right?
Yeah. Yes, it was. Connection. I write a lot about that now. I've done several blogs on that this year already. But I have a chapter in the Engage with Honor book called two chapters. One is connecting based on personality. You got to manage people differently based on their natural behavior style and their talent. So you manage Lee Ellis with a 2x4 upside the head, or you won't even get his attention. You manage Mary Ellis, his wife, with some kind words and give her some written instructions, and that works great. Of course, she doesn't conquer the mountain like I do. I'm going to go through it, around it, over it somehow. We're different personalities, and so we have different talents, different work. The other connection, though, is connection with the heart, and I think that's what you're talking about here. And it's so crucial. We did have those kind of connections in the Hilton. For one thing, when you're alone in a POW camp and they're threatening you with war crimes trials and you may never go home, connection is so important. And to be connected with another human being who's friendly to you and who's not operating as a communist enemy was so important that we, our bond, crisis makes you bond with people who are on your side, and we certainly did bond that way. The thing that I see, and you mentioned the word touchy-feely, here's what we know. 40% of the population is born results-oriented, mission-focused. 40% of the world is born relationship-oriented, people-focused. And so to be a great leader, though, you have to do both. Because if you don't connect with your people, if you don't relate to your people, if you don't listen to your people, if you don't affirm your people, their performance, their energy at work goes down. And some people think, well, it's a transaction. I pay you and you should come to work and do your best. Well, that's true. But the other part of that is human beings are complex. We have emotions, we have feelings, we have desires that we want to be special. We want to accomplish something. We want to have a purpose. We want to know that what we're doing counts. And if our leader doesn't connect with us and let us know those kind of things, the energy is just not ever the same. The ingenuity is not the same because there's no energy to solve the problems and make things better because they don't care anyway. My boss doesn't care. As long as I show up and do my job, he doesn't care. But that connection with the heart, which is the things that go with that would be listening, encouraging, affirming, giving positive feedback, giving critiques that help them develop, correcting them, of course, coaching them where they need help, supporting them when they have obstacles that are above their pay grade. All those kind of things let them know that you're very important to this organization. You're very important to me. And that brings into your fold a committed, engaged employee. If you look at Gallup's research, So a higher percentage of the employees in America and around the world today are not fully engaged. Uh, about 20% are fully engaged and about 20% engaged. And then there's about 50% that are not much engaged. And so, as a leader, you got to own that. That's your issue. And so how do you get them engaged? And the best way is for them to know that you care about them. That's the most important thing. It sounds touchy-feely, but here's the good news for all the results-oriented people who think it's touchy-feely. It's going to get you better results, make you more money, and it's going to make a happier workplace for everybody. So, hitch up your boots and go out and learn to affirm people, learn to connect with people. I coach people on this every day. Of course, I have to coach relationship people on how to be tough too.
Well, right. You need both, right? And that, so I love, between the two books, there's a lot of, there's a lot of words dedicated, to Admiral Stockdale and how he kind of did everything you just talked about. He was tough when he needed to be tough. He sacrificed when he needed to be sacrificial. One of my favorite stories that has been told of him was, the one where the guard caught one of the fellow inmates, using your knocking system. And, and if I understood the story right, when he come barging in the door, Stockdale hit him to take him off of his cellmate, right?
Yeah, I think I've heard that story too. Yeah. So he was just a great guy, very courageous and amazing courage. But, at the end, he said the most important thing I learned in my POW experience is that we are our brother's keeper.
Mm. Yeah. And I like that because reading up on him and how he was a student of the Stoics, and he's got one, the Epictetus says, men are not disturbed by things, but the view of which they take of them. And I thought that was such a powerful quote to have in that environment because, reading all of the stories of, you'd be locked in a small cell with someone for weeks at a time and, they may have just this nervous tick or whatever that's driving you crazy, but that's their coping mechanism and you have to learn how to deal with that because that's how they're dealing with their situation. And that is critical.
Yeah, I think it was, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. I was going to say, I think that's critical because we have a lot of that going on in our organizations today and we don't have that grace to deal with it.
Yeah. Well, I'm just coming out with a new book. It'll be out next fall. We're just finishing it up right now, but it has to go through a process once it gets finished. So, but it's about behavior, leadership. It's based around our leadership behavior DNA assessment. And a big focus of that is learning to manage differences and relate to differences because, somebody who's very detailed and picky can drive you nuts because they're detailed and picky about everything. That's their strength. Their strength is they're very detailed and they get it right. And they do the things that make when I'm flying from the U.S. to Hong Kong or the U.S. to Singapore or Japan, not direct Singapore, we go fly from Atlanta to Narita in Tokyo, that's a 14-hour flight. Mm-hmm. Those engines over the ocean, man, those engines are turning perfectly for hours and hours and hours, that whole airplane. And I'm so thankful for those people that are detailed and accurate and get it right.
Right.
But some of those people, if you're around them all the time, they drive me nuts. But the other side of that is I'm emotional, I'm loud, I'm talkative. I say about half the things that go through my mind come out my mouth. And, I have to work at throttling that back. So I'm aware of that. But I can drive them nuts. So that's the whole idea of working together. And in the POW camp, we had to learn to accept someone as they were, value their strengths, and look over their struggles. Just overlook them because you're not going to make them change. They can work on it like I'm working on some of mine, but I'll always be working on them, and I'll never get perfect compared to them. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. I can identify. I'm loud and country too, and I was raised by my grandfather, who was a World War II veteran. Jumped out of planes over the European theater, And as he always said, he was deaf in one ear and couldn't hear out of the other one. So growing up with him, my normal speaking voice is like, why are you shouting at me to other people?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so you're right. I almost have to feel like I'm whispering to talk at a normal tone to most people.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I like that what you just said there about, being aware and working on it, and that's the key factor when we're talking to organizations is the number one thing that you can do to fix, whether we're talking about unconscious bias, whether it's racial, sexual harassment issues in an organization, is be aware of the cause and be willing to fix it.
Yeah. Yeah. I there's certain things that you just got to shut down and shut down quickly. And the way you do that, you got a mindset, let's say. And, I'll take my parents, I grew up in segregation days, but we were always around black people, and some of them were our closest friends. We loved them, but the culture was segregated. And so that's what they knew. And that's kind of what I knew until I got to college. But once we saw the light, so to speak, we flipped the switch. Because we'd always loved them. So it wasn't any problem loving black people. It was just this flip the switch on the social, cultural things. We flipped that switch, and we knew it was right, and we did it quickly. That's a mindset. A mindset, you can turn those around pretty quickly sometimes. And natural behavior, though, like being detailed and organized and picky, those things are kind of built into your DNA and your brain. And so you're always coaching yourself on those. And so what we like to do is help people learn to self-coach, learn that once you become self-aware, you can self-coach. And you have to do that with some of those mindsets too, because they'll keep popping up and you have to just say, wait a minute, I've shut you down over there. That's not the way I see the world anymore.
Yeah. Well, and two, there's that piece of putting people in the right place to succeed, that detail-oriented person. You want them on detail-oriented tasks.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm not sure. Have you ever read the Book of Five Rings?
Of what?
It's called the Book of Five Rings. It's a Japanese text, but
I haven't read. I've read the Five Voices.
Oh, I haven't read that one, so there we go. We'll have to.
Okay.
But no,
well, they're good. They're good, but they're not going to be as good as ours is coming out.
Well, no, and that's good.
I'm kidding.
Oh, hey, no. I mean, I'm looking forward to it. I got to get caught up with Engage with Honor, especially knowing that you got another one coming out. But
yeah,
in the Book of Five Rings, there's one of the books. It's talking about the way of the master carpenter. And in this way of the master carpenter, he says what sets a master carpenter apart is being able to look at all the different pieces of wood and know how to use them. Some woods are perfect for the beams. Some woods are perfect for the mantles. Some woods are perfect for nothing more than being the campfire at night.
Yeah.
If you know how to use them, you can be a master carpenter. And I read that. I thought this is the same thing with people, and I think this is what you're saying here is when you know your people and know how to use them, that's what sets apart a entry-level leader from a master-level leader.
Yeah, no question about it. And, I think the book that you've read, I tell the story of the time when I put the wrong guy in charge of the United Way. In the Air Force, it was called a Combined Federal Campaign, but it was like the United Way, part of the United Way. And I put the wrong guy in charge. I put a guy who was more of an engineer than a salesman. They were both really good instructor pilots for me. So they both were good pilots. They were both top-notch pilots. But the first one I put was like an engineer, and he wasn't a promoter or a sales guy. And so we didn't do very well. I go to stand-up briefing every week, and they show the temperature gauge going up with how much money your group had raised, and you're supposed to go out the top. We never got to the top in my unit that year, and I was so embarrassed. And I realized I picked the wrong guy. He's a really good guy, but he wasn't a salesman. So the next year, I picked a guy who was much more of a promotional guy, and we blew it out very quickly. And that was my big lesson of how, both guys were great instructor pilots, but they sure were not good salesmen. One of them was, one of them wasn't.
Right. And it just made a world of difference. I mean, like you said, two great guys.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So,
and then I've helped companies when hiring for sales organizations and IT organizations over the years. And, there are just certain qualities that about 80 to 90% of the time, you have to have those qualities. There are a few people that are good salespeople without those. They do it in a systematic way. But most of the time, they're pretty outgoing and spontaneous and all that sort of stuff.
So, full disclosure, I've quoted your book quite a bit in some of the training that we've done. I encourage people to pick it up. I think it's a great, Leading with Honor. I think it's a great book. But the whole experience, right? Just the kind of laboratory, if you will, that y'all were in that experience, it seems to have generated it's some of the country's best leaders. I mean, your foreword for Leading with Honor was written by the late, great John McCain. And it always intrigues me when I start talking about the things that worked in that environment. I hear, yeah, but that's not going to work here. How do you answer, if you run into that, how do you overcome that when people think, sure, it can work in a prison in the middle of Vietnam, but it's not going to work in my cushy, comfortable corporate world?
Well, true principles, true principles work everywhere. They work at home, in your family life. They work at work. They work in a POW camp. So listening to others before you make important decisions, getting good feedback, getting everybody's input, man, that works. The POW leaders, they'd never been POW leaders before, and they wanted, if they could talk to somebody, they wanted to vet their ideas with them because they knew there might be something that they weren't seeing, that their angle on the situation was not complete. So they welcomed input, and good leaders welcome input. I've seen a lot of leaders, though, the bad ones, man, they don't want anybody to speak up because they're afraid they'll say something different than what they want to do, and then they got a problem. See, they don't have the courage to adjust. Courage, you think about courage. Everything in leadership, every leadership principle is centered on courage, because you can have all the principles in the world. If you don't have courage to go do them, they won't get you anywhere. So commitment, character, those are going to be very important. People are watching you. Can I trust you? Do you do what you say you'll do? Do you follow up? Do you let good people go, bad people, people who either have bad behavior or bad performance? Are you not dealing with that? Well, in the POW camp, you have to deal with that, but you have to deal with it in every organization. If you don't, you're going to lose respect, and you're going to have people on the payroll that are not carrying their load, and everybody's going to wonder when the boss is going to wake up and do his job, so to speak. So on and on, whatever it is, it's building a culture. Oh man, culture was everything. The culture that our senior leaders built for us, very simple, very powerful. We did not have to have a manager standing over us telling us what to do, because we knew what our job was. It was to resist the enemy, to follow the code of conduct, and return with honor. And that was broad guidelines, but it was more than enough to keep our behavior. Everybody was doing its best to do that. And if we did that, then whatever it looked like was going to be good. It may look different one day than the next with one person the next. But when, they're beating on you, some people are tougher than others. And that's just, we came to understand that as a reality. So we knew we were doing our best. And the people who weren't, we also knew who those were, the people. Very, very few people collaborated, but we knew about that too. So, whether it's accountability, whether it's building your culture, where it's building a good team and getting the right people, as Jim Collins talks about in Good to Great, getting the right people not only on the bus, but in the right seat on the bus. You can have a great person, but if they're in the wrong job, that's not going to work. You got to go look at their talents, their experience, everything that, there are 14 lessons in Leading with Honor, and every one of those is applied right here in the workplace every day. Developing your people, huge. We had classes, and we learned languages and math, sitting in those cells with no pencil and paper. But we did it in our head and writing on the floor, concrete slab floor with a piece of broken brick tile off the roof. with our chalk, and we could work out. I learned differential calculus there from a guy from the Naval Academy who ultimately came home after the war and was the dean of the math department at the Naval Academy. So, there's plenty of talent around, and developing those talents is so important, developing your people. So I could go on, but you get the idea that a principle like that of developing your people, of building a cohesive team, of clarifying, over communicating the message. You have to over communicate it. Well, we fought to communicate because they wouldn't let us communicate. So we had tap codes, we had all sorts of codes, hand codes, but we had to communicate. And you as a leader, you can't just go in your office and shut the door and think that everybody knows what they need to be doing and what the mission, vision, and values is, or what the commander's intent is. Those kind of things, you got to make sure people understand, and you clarify what your expectations are and what the standards are. But then you also have to celebrate. And that's another key principle that a lot of results-oriented leaders, they don't see the need to celebrate. I've had them tell me, hey, man, we celebrate, they'll slow down. I don't want to celebrate. Well, that's just stupid, because good people do need to celebrate a victory, and now they're fired up to go after another one,
Right. Yeah, no, capturing that momentum. And you said, you said a lot there, and it's so much value, and thank you for that answer. And, I keep thinking about there's all these stories from the books that I want to reference, but I don't want to give too much of it away, because I really want to encourage anybody who hasn't, go get your books. I'll have links to those in the show notes. But the overall theme, you mentioned some of the beatings and torture, and one thing that intrigued me, and this is when I'm talking, I probably the point I referenced the most is, I've read different studies that show, like, the general population from Vietnam veterans, the PTSD rate was somewhere between 30 to 40%, but for the POWs, it was down in the 3 to 4% range. And a lot of that has been attributed to everything you just talked about, that sense of belongingness, that keeping your mind sharp, that positive mental attitude. And yet again, organizations today, they just kind of, we're worried about the bottom line. We don't have time to put into these programs. But because you all invested that time in the communication, the reaching out, making everybody feel like they belong, it had such a drastic impact on the final outcome of the situation y'all were in. Mm-hmm. And by a lot of accounts, as crazy as the situation was, set y'all up for a lifetime of success. Obviously not everybody achieved the same level of success, but people like you, again, Senator McCain, and there's other senators and congressmen and Fortune 500 executives that came out of that relatively small pool better off in some cases, obviously not physically because of the things that you went through, but mentally tough. And that is critical, right?
Yeah, it is. There's several pieces in that. One is we had the discipline, we had the culture that says we are going to fight and win. We're not giving up. We're going to fight and win. And we were a very competitive group of people. Also, we were older than Korean War POWs, much older, and older than your typical soldier in Vietnam. The average age of the POWs was 30 and a half. I went in, I just turned 24, so I'm the kid on the block. Most of the people were 5 or 6 years older than me. And so that made it, older people are more stable, more secure. They've been through some life issues. They didn't just leave home and go in the military. The other thing is we stayed with our group. And because the American people put so much pressure on the communists about our treatment, when Ho Chi Minh died in the fall of 1969, which I'd been there 2 years then, and in a few months, new leadership stopped the torture. So we had about 3 years, 2 to 3 years, where it was more live and let live. And we had time to decompress and time with people who had been through worse than we had. I lived with guys that had been there 7 and a half. One guy was there right at 8 years. So there was always somebody who had suffered more nearby to decompress and talk with it. And we knew we had to get ready. So in those 2 years, we started getting rid of our bitterness and our anger, getting ourselves ready to go home. Well, these guys today, they're fighting a war and they get on an airplane, fly home, and the next day they're having lunch and dinner with their family who knows nothing about what they've been through, knows nothing about their buddies. They're separated from their unit then, and they go back into the civilian world, and they are back even to a military world where they don't have that same sense of belonging. And so it's the PTSD is quite a bit higher. Ours is like 4%, and the average otherwise for people who've been through more than 3 deployments, it's up around 30-40%. So we had a different situation there, being older and that strong bond, and then having the 2 years to decompress. Even World War II, they put them on boats for a month, shipping them back home. It gave them time to decompress some and get ready to go home, but they still had a good bit. So there are a lot of pieces to that, but I think our strong bond, and we continue to meet and have reunions. The older age and then the time to decompress, I'd say, was the real issues there for us.
Well, so it's almost like you were reading my mind, because are you familiar with Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman and his work?
Yes, I think so.
Right. He wrote a book on killing, and you almost cited it verbatim as some of the conclusions he came to with the decompression, the staying with your unit, and some of the things that have led to modern PTSD rates being so high, even though comparatively speaking, war is always going to be hell, but comparatively speaking, the way we fight war today should, by most psychologists' accounts, be less psychologically traumatic than, World War I, World War II, and even through Vietnam. But all the same things, and that was going to be, you segued nicely into one of my next questions. As we have more veterans coming from the global war on terror, trying to reintegrate back into society, what can an organization do to help that transition from their standpoint?
I think you want to bring them in and get them into the team where they feel part of the team, because they've lost their team, so to speak, and bring them in and spend some time helping them get to know people and feel like they're part of the team, because that community, there's nothing better than community. Whether you're trying to grow in yourself in leadership, you really need to be involved in community, whether you're in, the 12-step program community. Most everything, old people that are in community live longer than people who are living alone. So community is very important. Get them in there and help them to feel valued. Give them a sense of purpose, because in the military you had a sense of purpose of what our job was, and we were serving, and something bigger than yourself. Those kind of things are very, very important to get them engaged, and don't let them hang out. The worst thing you can do is have people in an organization that are not connected. So the immediate supervisor always needs to be connected to their people. That was another big mistake I made once. I had a guy who broke his leg and couldn't fly, and after a few weeks and couple of weeks on crutches, his boss was kind of let him go home and not come to work. And we lost connection with him, and he was already we didn't know this, getting into drugs, but I learned that he was actually selling drugs, and I ended up sending him to Leavenworth. And I felt like it might have happened anyway, but me and his supervisor, we should have demanded him stay connected in a much better way. We should have made him do something every day. And so I learned a lesson. Don't let people be around and not be connected to the unit, because that's, you need to know what's going on with them.
Yeah, and I think that's valuable advice. Having some friends who work for different organizations that help companies recruit and hire veterans. That's the number one complaint, is you have a lot of organizations out there that they want to do the right thing. They want to help, and so they put on a campaign to hire veterans. But then once they get there, they don't know how to utilize them. And that sense of purpose is critical.
Yeah. Let me say one other thing about the society today. It's a very different society. I was the youngest guy there, but I grew up plowing mules and farm and feeding the hogs and chopping the wood. And I was part of the family economic system. We worked whether it was hot or cold. I worked all day long every summer on the fields, either there or in the peach packing shed. We grew up understanding hardship. I raised and fed a 4-H club hog and then shot it and dressed it and killed it and ate it. These kids growing up today, they just haven't lived in that kind of world where you did those kind of things. And I think those kind of things makes you more resilient because we had responsibility a 10-year-old had a lot of responsibility back then. Today is, 20-year-old has virtually no responsibility today for the most part, most young people. And if they do, somebody does try to make them accountable, a 15-year-old high school student, their parents come down and raise hell with the school, so it's a tough world. These young kids, the culture and the parenting that goes on today, there's a lot of good about it, but there's a lot of stuff that it really inhibits the inner confidence and resilience of young people today.
I agree. Again, as we were talking beforehand, I served in peacetime, but the whole foundation of Marine Corps boot camp is to get you comfortable being uncomfortable. And,
exactly.
And
yep.
That is, it's a great mindset to have. And I think you're right. It's something that a lot of folks are deprived of because of the social and economic advances our country has had. That's just not there anymore. And that's a great point to make. So thank you for making it.
Yeah.
Well, sir, we're coming up on, about 35 minutes or so here. And I know you're a busy man and your time is very valuable. So, just working to wrap it up, I always like to ask this question last. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like to share with the audience?
Yeah, I had one more thing that we kind of almost touched on, but it goes back to your opening question about the burden of leadership.
Mm-hmm.
I keep a list because I think the challenge of leadership is understanding what's expected and being able to reconcile yourself to it. So the paradox of leadership, you have to be a generalist and see the big picture, but you need to be a specialist. You have to be a visionary, but you have to be practical. You have to be strategic, but tactical. You have to be confident, but humble. You have to be detached at times, yet you have to be sensitive to others. You have to be tough, yet compassionate. You have to have strong opinions, but you have to be a good listener. Man, these things don't go together. This is like walking both sides of the street at the same time. You have to be bold and cautious, quick and patient, independent and a team player. It just goes on and on. You have to be able to live in chaos and you have to bring order. You have to be serious, fun. You see the challenge of why leadership is a burden. And for some people, they don't want that. Okay. I get it. I had a guy tell me the other day, he said, I don't want to be a manager because I don't want to deal with all the people stuff. And I said, you're a wise man. If that's what you know, you're very wise if you don't want to deal with it, because as a leader, you got to deal with all these things of being tough, being kind and loving people, but being detached when you need to send them to Leavenworth if you have to. Leavenworth's a federal prison for those that don't know.
Yeah, that's where they say you turn big rocks into little rocks.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Well, sir, no, that is great. And that was, again, serving in peacetime, people always ask me, what is the one thing that worried you as a Marine? I said, and it shocks a lot of people. And I love it because it ties in with what you were saying is everybody's got this image, especially of the Marines, of Gunny Hartman going up and down and just yelling and screaming, and that's what Marine Corps leadership is like. And they tell you that no, once you get into real leadership, it's like you have to love your teammates so much that you'll do anything to protect them, but you still have to be willing to put them in harm's way to get the mission done.
Yep, exactly.
And it's just, and that was, again, thankfully, that was not something I ever had to face, but it was something that they prepared you for. And people don't associate military leadership and love, but you do. You learn to love those guys more than your own flesh and blood in a lot of instances.
Yeah. I've read one of my friends, a retired Marine colonel who served in Vietnam, and he talked in his book, he talks about he had a PFC or corporal who he said is the best point man I ever had. And he said, the leader can't always walk point. And so you have to have point people, somebody, and you take turns. But he said this guy wanted it and he was good at it. And he said, we loved him but we loved all our people. And I think the Marines actually do the best job of really listening to and respecting their enlisted guys. Marine officers do. I think they learn that well. And I think it's a concern I have had at times from some of the other services where they didn't really deeply care about their enlisted men as much as the Marines do. I think they set a good example of that.
Well, appreciate it. And that's a good note to end on. So, Colonel, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. And we'll have links to all of your information, the books you have out now. What was the title of your book coming up?
Well, we're still negotiating that, but it's Leadership Behavior DNA, Understanding Talents, Managing Differences.
Okay.
And pretty close. Leadership behavior, we have an assessment called Leadership Behavior DNA, and it points out your strengths and your struggles in each of 8 factors. And so the book is about that, but it's also about how to actually use that information to manage and lead differences.
Okay. Well, no, that's good. We'll keep an eye out for that one. And
good.
And again, thank you for your time. And for our listeners, I'll have all these notes in the show notes so you can access these. And I highly encourage you reading those books and interacting with Colonel Ellis on social media. We'll have some of that contact info there. He's very active on LinkedIn. And with that, listeners, thank you for your time. All right, thanks for tuning in. If you have any comments or questions for me or my guest, or you would like to suggest a future guest, send them to me at burden.command@gmail.com. Be sure to rate and review us on your podcast platform of choice. I look forward to speaking with you again in the next episode.